Senator, I don't have a specific, but I will say that on his behalf, I attend the Nuclear Weapon Council meetings. It's my responsibility as ASD Space Policy to Nuclear Weapons Policy, and so we've got a close working relationship, and I think from a panel standpoint, at least in my mind, Senator.
Sure, I'm glad you do that, and I'm sure you do. Was he in the Pentagon today working? Does anybody know? Admiral Grady, do you know if he was in the Pentagon working today?
I do not know, sir.
Is he in the Washington National Capital Region? Do you know that, Mr. Plum?
Sir, I do not.
Mr. LaPlante, you're the chair of the council. Do you know where one of your council members is?
I don't.
This hearing?
Not right now or not today. Thank you.
I just want to point out this seems to be a part of a continued pattern on behalf of the chairman of the committee and the chairman apparently now of this subcommittee of protecting Colin Kahl at all costs from appearing in public before this committee, and I think it's a pattern that should stop. Admiral Richard, I know you've already touched briefly on this. I was gone. I just want to make sure I understand your testimony. You said on your unfunded priorities list that you need, quote, a low-yield, non-ballistic capability to deter and respond without visible generation. Let's put that in plain English. Low-yield, non-ballistic capability, that sounds a lot like a cruise missile. Without visible generation, that sounds like something that's not on an airplane. So to me, that sounds like a sea-launched cruise missile with nuclear capabilities. Is that right?
Senator, a sea-launched cruise missile would fit those requirements.
Okay. So is it your best military advice that we continue developing this nuclear-capable sea-launched cruise missile?
Senator, yes.
So you agree in that regard with Chairman Milley and General Walters' testimony?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Admiral Grady, you just heard Admiral Richard's testimony. Is it your best military advice that we continue with the sea-launched cruise missile with nuclear capabilities as well?
Senator, it is.
Okay. Admiral Richard, given that Russia's arsenal already exceeds ours and that China's arsenal is rapidly growing, if we keep our plans exactly the same as they are today, will the STRATCOM commander who comes after you in 8 years, 2030, have a force that is capable of deterring both Russia and China?
That is the number one question that we need to ask ourselves as this moves forward.
That's why I asked you.
Right. What we have is the absolute minimum. It depends on the trajectory where this goes, and we will not be able to do it with the same level of risk that we're carrying today if we don't ask that question.
Churchill said in his Iron Curtain speech that you should not engage in temptations of a trial of strength by merely exceeding your adversary by a small amount in military power. Do you agree with Churchill's recommendation that you don't encourage trials of strength?
I do, but I would also point out, look, it's not necessary to match your opponent weapon to weapon. We have a good strategy. You have to have sufficient capability to execute that strategy as the threat changes, and that's the question that triad is the minimum. We're going to have to ask that question going in the future to execute the strategy.
How many road mobile and rail mobile missiles does Russia have?
Senator, I need to give you that answer in a classified forum.
Let me ask you this. Do they have road mobile and rail mobile missiles?
They have road mobile missiles, yes.
Okay. What about China?
China has a significant number of road mobile missiles.
Okay. How many road mobile and rail mobile missiles does the United States have?
We do not have any.
Oh, we don't have any at all?
No, sir.
So that's yet another capacity that we have refrained from developing over the years for justifiable reasons, I understand. My point is that we can't simply decide to disarm unilaterally on all these different domains like a sea-launched cruise missile or other non-strategic or tactical or battlefield weapons, however you want to phrase them. Admiral Richard, one final question. So I'm pleased to see that, once again, the forces in favor of modernizing our triad, which, as you say, is the absolute minimum, have succeeded against the efforts of the far left to defund them. I do worry about some potential single points of failure on these modernization programs, though, and the operational impacts that could occur from any delays. Could you share your thoughts on this risk and how to avoid it?
First, Senator, what I want to offer is 3 STRATCOM commanders in a row have come here and said we have no margin. We don't have any operational margin left. We use that operational margin to delay the recapitalization as long as we have. What is left inside your triad is its inherent ability to hedge between legs, inter-leg hedging. That capability is there for operational, technical, and geopolitical risks. It was not placed in our triad for programmatic convenience. I recommend that we maintain that hedge for the purpose it was designed for, and we start asking the question, what's it going to take to get this recapitalization done on time? Because I have very little ability operationally to mitigate delays.
All right. Thank you all for your very important work on the Nuclear Weapons Council.
Thanks, Senator Cotton. Senator Rosen, you're recognized, and if Senator King does not appear at the conclusion of your comments, could you recognize Senator Rounds on behalf of the chair? Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today and for all your work and your service to our country. I really appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Nevada test site. I'm going to keep calling it the Nevada test site. It's a lot easier than the Nevada National Security Site, NNSS. It's a little easier to say that. You know, it was ground zero for the majority of our country's explosive nuclear testing between 1945 and 1992, with 100 atmospheric tests and 828 underground tests being conducted at the site. As someone who lived in Nevada when our nation conducted the last explosive testing that shook the ground, the whole ground would shake all around Las Vegas on those first Saturdays of the month when they would do them, I am more than strongly opposed to the resumption of explosive nuclear testing in our state. So today the site oversees the stockpiled stewardship program, principally, as we know, at the U1A facility, an underground laboratory where scientists conduct subcritical experiments to verify the reliability and effectiveness of our nuclear stockpile. So, Administrator Ruby, I know we've spoken about this, just for the record. In your professional opinion, do you agree that there is not a current or foreseeable need for the United States to resume explosive nuclear testing that produces nuclear yields?
Yes, Senator Rosen, I do. And I would just go further to say our entire stockpile stewardship program is designed around the principle that we will make sure we understand weapons enough so that we don't have to test.
Thank you. And I want to build a little bit again on our discussion last week about U1A advancements and how will the U1A upgrades, the upgrades to the complex, improve the stockpile stewardship program so that, honestly, we will never have to return to those days of explosive nuclear weapons testing?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. The U1A complex at the Nevada test site, I'll follow your lead.
Yeah, easier to say.
Is the tunnel complex where we do subcritical tests to study the science. And we're investing significantly in upgrading the infrastructure in that tunnel complex, as well as new experimental capabilities in the enhanced capabilities for subcritical experiment project. And with that, when we're able to do those experiments, we'll be able to use weapon-relevant geometries and materials to study the implosion of a pit that will allow us to have even better models and assess the stockpile so that we don't have to test.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question on this to you, Administrator Ruby. The Nuclear Weapons Council is required to report regularly to the President regarding the safety and reliability of the U.S. stockpile and to provide an annual recommendation on the need to resume underground nuclear explosive testing, like we're talking about, to preserve the credibility of the U.S. nuclear deterrent. And so I'm going to ask you, Administrator Ruby and Secretary LaPlante, what is the position of the Council on renewed explosive testing for the record?
Yeah, you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. As you rightly state, the three NNSA lab directors are required by law to assess the safety and reliability and performance of our stockpile, and to specifically address whether or not we need testing at this time. And to date, the statements have been clear that testing is not needed.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
And I would just add that my understanding, again, the Nuclear Weapons Council agreed with that assessment, and that testing at this time is not needed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just going to ask quickly about the FY21 NDA. Included a provision designed to ensure that the Nuclear Weapons Council has an opportunity to review the test site budget early enough so it can determine whether the budget adequately supports DoD requirements. Requires the Secretary of Energy to submit the proposed budget to the Council prior to submitting it to OMB. And so, Administrator Ruby, last question. I'm sorry, well, if you can answer quickly. Has this new review process had any impacts on the budget to modernize and recapitalize the test site infrastructure?
I do not believe so. I've only done the process once. And in this process, the Nuclear Weapons Council assessed that the DOE budget for the test site was adequate.
All right, well, maybe we can talk offline a little bit more about that. Thank you very much. And let's see. Oh, Senator King. Oh, no, Senator Rounds, I believe.
Senator Rounds is next.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Richard, well, first of all, let me just say thank you to all of you for your service to our country, and I think it is very special that the entire council be here today. This is a very special opportunity for us. Admiral Richard, in August of 2021 at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium, you described China's explosive growth and modernization of its nuclear and conventional forces as breathtaking. You went on to caution, make no mistake, China's strategic breakout is cause for action, and that we need to understand what we are up against. Now, I'd like to just have you share with us, or to describe in plain and as simple English as we can get to, as I call it, third grade level here, as the U.S. Stratcom commander, what it is that we're up against, so that the American people clearly understand how grave this threat truly is, and to assure that we continue to pace this growing threat with our own capabilities for ourselves and our allies. Could you also speak to how imperative it is that we do the threat to capability need reviews on a more continuing basis?
Senator, let me start by trying to characterize the speed this way. When I first testified 2 years ago, the great debate was whether China was going to double its stockpile by the end of the decade. That's already happened while I've been the commander of U.S. Strategic Command. Details that you would like to have. The biggest and most visible one is the expansion from 0 to at least 360 solid-fueled intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Significant growth, and this has occurred over the course of just a few years. Doubled number of road mobile missiles. China now has a true air leg, nuclear capable with their H-6N bombers and an air-launched ballistic missile. They're now capable of continuous at-sea deterrent patrols with their Jin-class submarines from Protected Bastion in the South China Sea, and more are coming. They have a true nuclear command and control system. They're building a warning system. They aspire to launch under warning, launch under attack capability. They've raised the readiness of their forces. They have a substantial number of theater range systems, many of which are nuclear, which have no role in a true minimum deterrent, no first use policy. They're changing their command and control, and this is before we even get into the novel weapon systems. The most public one of those was the fractional orbit bombardment system that has an unlimited range, can attack from any azimuth, and comes down in a hypersonic glide vehicle with great performance. No nation in history has ever demonstrated that capability. And Senator, the rest of the details are actually in my written posture statement, but that's why I describe this as this is easily the biggest expansion in China's history and rivals the biggest expansion of any nation in history, including us and the Soviet Union back in the early 60s.
And just for the record, they are continuing to produce nuclear weapons to fill these expected weapon systems at an ongoing and very rapid rate. And I don't know whether we can talk about how quick it is, but it is at a very significant rate, correct?
Senator, yes. The bottom line, what I've directed my staff at Stratcom to do, and you're right, the details are classified. Whatever the intelligence community tells you about what China's going to do, divide it by 2 in time, and you'll probably be closer to what happens.
Thank you, Admiral. Administrator Ruby, this is the lead-in to the question that I would have for you with regarding our ability just to produce plutonium pits. Earlier, you mentioned that we're not going to make the 80 pits per year goal by 2030, which is what the statutory requirement is. If we're not going to, and recognizing just in terms, not even what all of our near-peer competitors are doing, but just what China alone is doing, would seem to me that if we're not even going to make this number, what's our plan B?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for that question. The first thing that we're doing, and we're actively working this in the Nuclear Weapons Council right now, is what can we do to have a safe, secure, reliable, and effective stockpile in light of what we think we can practically do in terms of making pits. We'll look at that carefully. There may be options, but we're in the middle. We're in the middle of that study. I just want to remind you that we're making new pits because we're concerned about pit aging. We don't want to put old pits in new weapons. If we think in the 30 years those weapons will be in the stockpile, they may have aging problems. But we don't know for sure that they will have aging problems because that's a science problem that's very difficult and that we're studying at NNSA. So one option.
If I could, what you've suggested then, and I'm out of time, but I would just say one of the options for Plan B is that we either rejuvenate or we continue to use existing pits that we already have in inventory.
Right, reuse pits.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Round. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's no secret that I think our nuclear modernization program is unsustainable and dangerous. I wanted to see significantly less emphasis on nuclear weapons in the national defense strategy, but the Biden administration made the right call in canceling the sea-launched cruise missile known as the SLCM or SLCM. A low-yield nuclear weapon launched from ships duplicates capabilities we already have and undermines the Navy's conventional mission. Even after eliminating this missile, however, our nuclear modernization program is still incredibly expensive. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that it would cost $1.7 trillion. And I suspect we're going to find out that that estimate, once again, is far too low. But we've been hearing a tremendous amount today from my Republican colleagues who somehow think we are still spending too little on nuclear weapons and the process of producing them. So let's just see if we can clear something up. Admiral Richard, we've discussed this before, but to confirm again, was Strategic Command fully consulted and able to fully participate in the nuclear posture review process?
Senator, as far as the process inside the Department of Defense, yes. And I'll also point out Ukraine and the crisis that we're in happened after the nuclear posture review.
All right. But you were part of this whole review, right?
I was, Senator.
All right. And I know that we have to make tough calls, especially to make sure that nuclear weapons spending doesn't cannibalize our conventional capabilities. The Navy said that pursuing SLCM would be, quote, unquote, quote, cost prohibitive. That's the description from the Navy. Our nuclear weapons modernization plans include constructing new plutonium pits, which produce the radioactive raw material we need for nuclear weapons. I remain concerned about the costs and the risks in the pit production program, which is already far behind schedule and far over budget. So Administrator Ruby, both Admiral Richard and your deputy have told this committee that throwing more money at this problem isn't going to get us to our original goal of 80 pits per year by 2030. The Nuclear Weapon Council has also concluded that additional funding simply will not get us there. So Administrator Ruby, despite the fact that more money won't solve the fundamental flaws in this program, your unfunded priorities list, the wish list that you submit to Congress on top of your $21.4 billion budget request, includes an additional $500 million more dollars for pit productions. Is that correct?
It is.
So, Administrator Ruby, when you were before this committee last week, you couldn't even tell us how much the pit production program would cost. So why should taxpayers be throwing an extra $500 million on top of a program that you don't even have a cost estimate for?
Yes, Senator Warren, we are in the process of doing the design so that we can have a credible cost and schedule estimate. That design will be complete in early '24. We do know, however, based on other construction projects that we're currently doing, that some items that will be needed in the pit production facility, like nuclear qualified piping and glove boxes, are taking a very long time to buy. So the request for additional monies has to do with procuring the long lead, some of the long lead items that we'll need, so when our design is complete, we can do construction at the fastest possible pace.
You know, I just have to say, it was your opening line there, when you said yourself just now that you don't have a credible estimate and that you're hoping to have a credible estimate at some point in the future. I got to say, I'm really unhappy to have to tell taxpayers that you get $500 million on something for which you don't have a credible estimate yet on what you're going to need, because the credible estimate actually may guide whether or not we decide to do this program and how we do this program. So saying, but go ahead and throw an extra $500 million in right now just in case, is troubling. Now look, I realize I'm out of time. Dr. LaPlante, I'm going to submit some questions for the record for you on where you see the most programmatic risk for the department in this. We can just go back and forth over that when we're not on the clock. You know, we're talking about spending trillions of dollars, and the American people truly, they want to spend what it takes to keep us safe. But when you can't answer basic questions about these programs, it does not inspire much confidence that this is the number that we should be supporting. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to have a short second round for those of us who are wishing to follow up. Secretary LaPlante, give me an assessment of where the GBSD program is. Are we on budget, on schedule? This is a big new project, and we don't want surprises. So, how do you feel about where that project stands right now? The Sentinel?
Senator, I'll start with a caveat that I'm doing a deep dive in the program probably in the next 1 to 2 weeks. The last time I did any bit of a deep dive, I would say as a citizen, whatever I was about 2 years where I was asked to look at it. So every impression I'm going to give you is what I sense.
Well, when you finish that process, I hope you'll inform the committee of your assessment.
I will, and but I will just say, as you know, they're somewhat early, 1 to 2 years into engineering, manufacturing, development. They're trying to get to a first flight. I would say of the 3 legs and where they are in their EMD, they're the earliest along. So that means there still is significant risk. What are the risk areas? The risk areas are rad-hard electronics. The risk areas are the infrastructure and all the rest of it. And I intend to look into it, and I will give you that assessment of where that is. I'm going to do a deep dive on all 3 of the legs, but I'm starting with GBSD.
I'd appreciate having that as soon as you have it available.
Yes, thank you.
As part of this hearing, I'd like to submit for the record a chart that has been prepared by staff that tracks the financial history of the nuclear enterprise. In 1962, the total triad expenses was 17% of the defense budget. In 1984, it was 10%. Before the modernization program that started a few years ago, it was about 2.7% of the defense budget. And when you add the recapitalization of the triad and of the nuclear facility, that includes the Columbia-class submarines, the B-21, and the GBSD, you get to about 6.4% of the defense budget. So I think it's important to keep these figures in perspective in terms of if this is the bedrock basis of our strategy to defend this country, we're still way below what it was 50 years ago, way below what it was 40 years ago, and a relatively modest percentage of the overall defense budget. That doesn't mean it's still not a lot of money, and I understand Senator Warren's questions that the taxpayers are being asked to pay this money, and it's our responsibility to be sure that it's used well and effectively. But I think the recapitalization is sort of skewing this discussion. I refer to it as the pig in the budget python. It's a very large expenditure that we're going to have to cover over a few years, frankly, in part because we've put off that expenditure for a number of years, and we're having to do all three legs of the triad at once. So I think that's an important perspective to have on the record of this hearing. A final question, and Administrator Ruby, I think this may be to you, although if others have an answer. It's a little puzzling to me. Apparently, China is expressing no interest whatsoever in any arms control, nonproliferation, even discussing it. They're just racing toward a very significant, and I suspect for them, an expensive nuclear enterprise. Why is that? Why can't we engage them in some mutual discussions that would assist both countries? And of course, once we get through what's going on now, re-engage with Russia on these issues. Nonproliferation is in everyone's interest, it seems to me, and cutting the expense of these programs is what led to the agreements 20 years ago.
Yeah, Senator King, your inclination on this is the same as mine. I do. First, let me just say it's the primary responsibility of the State Department to engage in those dialogues. The NNSA brings to those discussions a potential for technical collaboration, which worked in the past with Russian scientists and potentially could work with the Chinese, and we certainly offer that we would be willing to engage in good technical dialogue and discussion to the extent that could help strategic stability.
Thank you. For the record, could you give me your thoughts to the question that I asked Senator Richard about deterrence of a non-state actor? Because that's really a proliferation question. It may be that if deterrence doesn't work, we have to fall back on keeping this material out of their hands in the first place. And I'd like your thoughts on that for the record from this
I'd be happy to.
Committee. Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to thank all of you once again for being here today for this extremely important hearing that we're having. Administrator Ruby, last year the Nuclear Weapons Council noted significant concern about the long-term funding profile of NNSA's budget in a letter to this committee. And while this budget projects continued growth for next year, after that it would level off and then it would decline, which is exactly what the Nuclear Weapons Council warns against. Do you believe this level of funding is sufficient, or will increases beyond what's projected in this budget be necessary in order to meet our modernization requirements?
Senator Fisher, thank you for that question. We will be looking at the FinCIP again in light of what we know now, what our requirements are, as well as what our infrastructure needs are. And in fact, we're just starting the FY24 budget bill, so we'll be doing that in great detail.
Thank you. Dr. LaPlante, does the Nuclear Weapons Council remain concerned about the out-year budget for NNSA and continue to believe that low or no growth, quote, will not provide a sound foundation for the planned capabilities and capacities needed to meet current and future requirements, end quote.
Yeah, Senator, thanks for the question. The Nuclear Weapons Council, my understanding, again, did the deep dive review of the 23 budget, and that's the letter that I sent over on the 22nd. I believe, as the 24 budget starts to be built, we're going to be brought in and do the same thing again, and we will comment on whether we have concerns, just as we should, as the law provides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand that Senator Reid discussed the plutonium pit production and NNSA's request for additional funding, but Administrator Ruby, your unfunded priorities, which have been referenced here, the letter indicates the request contains $500 million shortfall in funding for pit production. I appreciate you making the committee aware of this and your clear testimony that these additional resources would help minimize any delay in achieving the target of 80 pits per year. I'd like to ask the rest of the panel their views on this. Do the members of the Nuclear Weapons Council agree these funds are necessary and believe it is critical to achieve full production as close to 2030 as possible? Secretary LaPlante, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. First, just as a formality, that as the chair of the Nuclear Weapons Council, we have not formally reviewed that, and we will, and we intend to do it in the next couple of weeks, and we will provide to you our assessment as a council. A personal view from the little that I've seen and discussed with the administrator, it appears, at least for the three items that she's identified, and she talked about this earlier in this hearing, of long lead items, they seem very sensible. And as we find, as the NNSA finds other things that are sensible to do, I think we need to investigate them and not make it a static process. We should be asking for these ideas all the time. So I defer to my colleagues for the rest of their reviews.
Okay. Madam Secretary, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, so we first heard about this at yesterday's Nuclear Weapons Council meeting.
Little closer to the mic.
Sorry.
We're a long ways away from it.
Sorry. How about this?
Very good.
Okay. So we first heard about this detail yesterday as a Nuclear Weapons Council, and certainly what Administrator Ruby talked about made a lot of sense. There's long lead items you need to buy when you do construction, so you don't stop the construction and wait for the long lead item. So we're eager to take a look at the details of this in the upcoming weeks, just as Dr. LaPlante mentioned.
Great, thank you. Secretary Plum.
Yes, Senator, I just echo the same comments Secretary LaPlante and Shyu have made, which is we're eager to lean forward. We'd all like to kind of look at it. I think that now that NSA's got some good fidelity on what that approach would be, I think we're all inclined to yes, but we'd like to get back to you.
Okay. Do you agree with the goal of what was presented, or do you agree that you have to minimize the delay?
The goal, as I think we're on the same page. The goal is to get to 80 pits per year as close to 2030 as possible. And so if we can find a way to do it, and I think the argument that I understand it is some of these procurement items, it's kind of like keeping a line going. So we want to keep the line going so we don't have to restart it.
We keep moving forward. So we
Yes,
keep
ma'am.
moving forward and don't shorten a big delay.
And don't add additional delay by not procuring, I think,
Yeah,
is a specific concern to the acquisition community.
Good. Admiral Grady?
Yes, ma'am, the military requirement is clear, 80 pits per year as soon as possible, if not by 2030, then as soon as possible after that. Looking forward to reviewing the director's proposals and making, helping the Nuclear Weapons Council decide whether this is the right way forward. But the military requirement is absolutely clear.
Thank you. Admiral Richard, anything to add?
I would just add, STRATCOM supports this or any other measure that NNSA can execute that minimizes the delay and ultimately reduces the operational risk that I'm going to have to carry because we can't meet the requirement.
And I would assume the operational risks need to be discussed and classified.
They will, and that, in fact, will be discussed as part of the Nuclear Weapons Council deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my colleague, Senator Warren, has asked a question, but I'm not sure that we've had the opportunity for a good response. I'd like to go into this a little bit. And Admiral Richard, I would begin with you, sir. Since you've been in the services, I don't believe that you've ever served at a time in which we did not have a very strong and well-defined nuclear deterrent. Can you imagine a world today where the United States did not have a clearly recognized nuclear deterrent capability that helps to keep peace in the rest of the world?
Senator, I cannot, and I think it's worth a second to explain why I say that.
I think so.
The nuclear deterrence is foundational to integrated deterrence because no other capability to date or combination of capabilities gets anywhere close to the destructive potential of nuclear. So if you don't set the foundation of your integrated deterrent, when you are in a competition with another nuclear-capable opponent, if you can't deter their vertical escalation, everything else is useless to you. The reverse is also true. If you set that strong foundation, then using every military and other international power is actually very much to your benefit because it enables you to resolve conflict at the lowest possible level of violence. But there's a theoretical reason why we have to have a strong nuclear deterrent.
See, I think sometimes because we live with it and we have always assumed that we are free because we are simply strong and economically powerful, and the rest of the world simply doesn't have the desire to dominate us, that somehow that means that we don't need the nuclear deterrent that we carry today. And because we have not had a threat to the homeland since really 9/11, and that was not a nuclear threat, I think there's a misunderstanding that somehow there is no need for this nuclear deterrent anymore. And I think the message that you're sharing, one that says the reason that we have been able to maintain our freedom is because we have had a clearly recognizable nuclear deterrent. But that also means generation after generation, we have to improve it and we have to keep up with our competition. If we had, and once again, I would defer, Admiral Richard, to you, but Admiral Grady, you are most certainly welcome to respond to this as well. Our adversaries have become better and better at, first of all, trying to defeat some of our nuclear capabilities and to defend basically not only against the nuclear, but some of our conventional capabilities as well. Would it be fair to say that if you simply said one nuclear bomb or one nuclear missile or one nuclear long-range weapon dropped from a B-52 bomber, since we could do that, our enemies would fear us? Clearly, it would not be the case. And clearly, we have to have enough weapons and modernized enough to where we can get around or at least make them think we have the capabilities of getting around them in order to maintain that deterrent, and that capability that they have is changing on a daily basis. Is that fair?
Senator, yes, it is.
Senator, I would just comment that the number is interesting, but it's the effect that number generates, and that is that it gives the president many options across a broad range of contingencies, and that's what drives the number. There's strong analysis and math behind that number, and that's what we need to have that credible nuclear deterrent that you and Admiral Richard have been talking about.
Admiral Grady, I think you need to lay that out in a little bit more explainable terms to the American public and to this committee. What do you mean by that when you say that when you have the deterrent, the trident, that you have multiple options available for the President of the United States in order to keep peace? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, Chaz, I think I'll defer to you on that one.
What you want to be able to do is offer the President any number of ways at which he might be able to create an effect that will change the opponent's decision calculus and get them to refrain or otherwise seek negotiation, vice continued hostility. So ballistic versus non-ballistic. Do you want it visible? Do you want it not visible? Do you want it prompt? Do you want it to come in a long period of time? Each of those is very situational specific. My recommendation on the Slick 'em in, for example, is not an effort to relitigate the nuclear posture review. It is based on the conditions we find ourselves in today. When I look at what I am able to offer to the President and ask myself, what would do a better job, lower the risk, give us more confidence in our deterrent capability, that's where that recommendation comes from. It's a specific example of the broader, that's why you want a lot of options, Senator.
And one last question. Admiral Grady, do you think Russia would have invaded Ukraine today if Ukraine was a nuclear capability, if they had a nuclear capability?
I think they would have had many, many second thoughts about that as an option for them if they were facing a nuclear-armed adversary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. I want to thank each and every one of you for your dedication to the country, for your sober-minded approach to these very difficult issues, for the work that you put in on behalf of the public, often in quiet and unsung ways. And I want you to know that we recognize what you're contributing to the defense of this country. The irony of nuclear weapons is that the reason we have them is that we never want to use them. And the best way to ensure that we never use them is to have them, and to have those who would commit aggression understand that this is something that has to be, as the Admiral said, part of their decision-making calculus. Evil exists in the world, and we have to be prepared to defend ourselves and our allies. And the work that you're doing is contributing mightily to that end. So I want to thank you again for your testimony today. Thank you for appearing before the committee. Senator Fisher, did you have a closing statement you'd like to make? No. Again, thank you, and this hearing is adjourned.